You just got your Sony ZV-E10 Mark II or are planning to get it and you're excited to start using it. The thing is, there's a list of obstacles that are preventing you from having the best experience doing so. So in this video, I'm gonna go through the settings that I first changed when I got my Sony ZV-E10 Mark II so that the images and everything that comes out of this is just the way that I want. I've used many Sony cameras over the years and the options just keep getting better while the cameras also get easier to use. So if you reprogram a bunch of these settings, you'll be able to have a better time capturing and creating without having to worry about messing up your flow. Stay to the end for my personal favorite setting that only the newer Sony cameras can benefit from, like this one. So first, let's set our camera to be able to shoot 4K. But before we do that, do note that when we do shoot 4K, over time it does take up a lot of space. But if we shoot 1080, it's also a little bit soft. So how do we kind of get the best of both worlds? Well, the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and change our video codec to XAVC 4K HS, which allows us to shoot 4K without having to sacrifice on our storage. I edit on an M1 MacBook Pro and I have no problem editing this, but if your computer struggles to edit that kind of footage, consider first switching to a different codec like XAVC-S, or maybe you might have to end up shooting 1080 if you haven't upgraded your computer yet. Alright, so we want to make sure on our mode switch that we're set to video, and then we'll hit menu, and then we're going to make sure that we're on the second menu here, this second tab on the side, right over here. I'm going to move over, and we're going to go scroll all the way down to this right here. Mine is set to XAVC HS 4K, and this is going to make sure that we get the best quality setting for the lowest amount of storage. Okay, and then over here, of course, you can always increase this. You can always choose any one of these, which is going to be better than what I have set here for 30 megabytes per second, 420 10-bit. Of course, if you want more data, you can always choose these higher ones, as well as better or just a little bit more color. But for me, what I do, 30 megabytes per second is good enough for me. Most people will stay at 100, others will stay at 50. For me, I'm at 30. But before we walk away from our 4K settings, we need to make sure that we're filming in the correct frame rate. You see, another factor of taking up too much storage in our SD card is the frame rate coming out of our videos. If we set it up to something like 60 or 120 frames per second, it's going to require a lot more data to be able to hold all those images because it shoots at 60 frames in a single second or 120 frames in a single second. Most of us really just need 24 frames per second. 24 frames per second is going to be plenty enough for these kind of talking head videos, where 60 to 120 frames is going to be great when it comes to slow motion stuff, and you know that you want to slow down the footage much later in post. Alright, to set our frame rate, we're going to go again to our second tab on the left here, move over, and you see here where it says rec frame rate, that's for our recording frame rate, and right now we have it set to 24p. And right now we can only set it to 60 or 24. I'm setting it for 24, and because we want to follow the 180-degree rule, at the very least we want to set it to, sorry, it's in vertical mode, but I'm setting it to 1/48 of a second. The 180-degree rule, generally to maintain that logical or visual motion blur that we want, is to make sure that this number, 1/48, is double the frame rate, which is 24. And of course, just make sure you balance out your ISO. By default, I'll leave it to at least 800. And yeah, if you want to shoot in 60, then of course we can change this to 60 frames per second. And then at the very least, I would change this to 1/125 of a second. Once we've done that, the next setting that I end up changing is the file name. Now, I have multiple cameras. This might be your first one, but I want to make sure that I dial in a different name here so that I can differentiate between the files. Otherwise, if I leave it on default, sometimes I can get lost in searching up for different files. Alright, So just like the other settings, we can go ahead and move over to our left tab here, the second one down, and go straight over to main 2 this time. And then we're gonna slide all the way over to the right where it says file settings. And I have it to my initials, but let's say I have multiple cameras. I'm not gonna name them all NBS, or I could, whichever. You have your different ways of setting your file name format. I'm gonna change my title, and I'm gonna change my title name here. And here I could put like ZVE10. I forget how many characters, but yeah, you can set them to your own settings so they're not the same default ones, or whatever you like. So at least that gives you an option there. And yeah. Once we got that dialed in, without a doubt, the next setting that I have to change is the timer on the display. This thing is, I believe, set to 30 seconds, if not a minute, and that's just too quick for me. I end up like putting my camera down, and as soon as I want to shoot something, oh, I gotta wake up my camera, I gotta press buttons, and I lose that second, 2 or 3 of the moment because I'm trying to wake up my camera. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this to at least 2 or 5 minutes so that I can go ahead and just have my camera ready to shoot in those kinds of special occasions, or just life in general, because, you know, YOLO. Alright, so we're not gonna go on our second tab here. We're gonna go all the way down to the yellow tab at setup. Move over to the right and go all the way down to number 9 where it says power setting option. Go over to the right, and then I'm gonna go all the way over here to power save start time, and I'm gonna leave it at 2 minutes where it was originally at like 10 seconds. I'll just give some buffering time. So just like that, and you're set. And if you know that you're someone who's going to have long recordings on this little guy, do know that you have to change this next important setting, which is the heat tolerance. You see, after you get to like that 45 minute to like an hour mark, this thing starts becoming a little bit temperamental. The ZVE10 Mark II has a built-in temperature reading that if you hit it while recording for long times, it'll just automatically turn off. You don't want that. You'll be recording some kind of concert and you'll be like, what happened? So instead we want to set that to high tolerance so that it'll last even just a little bit longer. Alright, so if you didn't already leave the previous setting, we're still going to be in the yellow tab, still going to be in number 9 power setting option, but this time we're going to go down to auto power off temperature, and we're going to make sure it's set to high instead of standard. And you'll get that warning, and you should be alright just by hitting OK. But I'm not responsible if you decide to take this baby out to the desert. There are companies that do sell an external fan that you can place on this thing, so, but more on that in another video. And of course, when you're recording video, you cannot ignore audio. And for our next setting, we want to go ahead and change our microphone level to 12. And setting it to 12 will make it so that our audio isn't too high, that it pretty much cracks and breaks the audio in post when we watch it back. But it also maintains just a little bit of balance. This will be fine if you're going to go ahead and mount an external microphone like the D4 Duo from Deity. That's the perfect level for this thing. It hasn't been a problem for me before. Just know that if you leave the audio level by default, it might be too high and you're just going to have a horrible time in your video editing software because you realize it's easier to bring up your audio than it is to bring down once you've already peaked at those high audio levels. So in order to get our microphone level up, we want to make sure that we're on the second tab here again, the main tab. We're going to go all the way to main 1 and then all the way to the bottom right hand corner here where it says audio rec level. And right now I already have it set to 12. Again, sorry for the vertical plane here, but you can go ahead and bring it down from like 24 from what it was originally and just bring it down to 12. And you're good. All right, we've done a lot so far, right? Give yourself a pat on the back. It's pretty good. Of all the settings, this is probably going to be one of the next important ones, and that's setting my exposure mode. This is pretty much just a fancy way of being able to dictate to our camera how we want to balance the brights and the darks of our images and keep it consistent. Yes, it's pretty normal if we shoot with our phones that when we point to ourselves or point away from us at whatever subject, that the video goes bright to dark or dark to bright. All those situations. When we want to take more control of our creative vision, we end up switching from auto to manual so that we have a more crisp and consistent setting of what our video will feel like. This also applies to photos. Being able to dictate our shutter speed, having the correct motion blur. This allows us to dial in the feel and the experience of our videos, like being able to dial in the right motion blur for our videos, or being able to dictate how much is in focus versus a blurry background, and all that good stuff. So I'm going to change the default setting from auto or intelligent mode to manual for more control. But of course, if you're new, stick to auto, and then we can move on from there. Just start creating. All right, to dial in the kind of exposure choice that we want, we'll go ahead to the second tab, go down to main 2, and right here where it says shoot mode, you have several to choose from, and that is, you have the intelligent mode, the intelligent auto, which is just auto mode. You have the program mode, aperture priority, shutter priority, and where I want it to be is manual. So that's what we're gonna leave it on. And now we'll be able to freely change things like our aperture, our shutter speed, and our ISO. Of all the beginner-friendly things about this camera that is annoying to me though, that I changed right away, is the sound settings. Every time I take a picture, every time I hit record, there's all these random sounds that come out of this camera. And for someone who tries to be discreet, especially if I'm, taking photos and videos in a church, I don't want to make noise. I don't want to make myself appear. I don't want to make the attention from the audience or the congregation towards me. I want to leave it in the service. I want to leave it at the speaker. So for me, I just want to be able to turn off these sounds and remain a ninja. Of course, it's nice to have audio feedback and the camera can let you know when you stop and start recording, but the way that I shoot and the environments that I shoot, quiet is actually better. I just have to compensate by being aware of whether or not I'm actually recording or not. So far, I've been okay. All right, let's dial in that sound by going all the way down to our yellow tab at the bottom, the setup tab. Go to the right, and we're going to go to the next page, which is number 10, our sound option. I'm going to go to the right, and I turn all of these here set to off. Of course, you can choose whether or not you want to include things like a shutter sound or starting and stopping the video sounds, so to let you know that you've ended your recording session or not. And then your audio signal, just in general, whether you like press buttons and all that. Yeah, I don't need to hear that audio feedback. I'm good with that. So when I'm out there shooting, it's nice and discreet. Of all the things that I love about this camera, we're getting to my favorite setting, by the way. Before we get to that one, my second favorite setting of this is being able to import your LUTs. And what LUTs are, it pretty much stands for look up table. It pretty much dials in the look of your video in a certain way. It's called color grading. LUTs are kind of like filters, except they're not exactly filters, but they dial in a certain look that you're free to dial in yourself when you're on your computer and you bring it back to your camera, and you have more selection, more variety, more freedom than what's already in here in the cinematic modes and the filters and the creative looks that they have on this camera. Let's see where we can import our LUTs, and that's going to be in our pink tab off to the side here, and we're going to go down to color tone and then over to manage user LUTs, import and edit. I already have one here, but of course you have plenty more to upload, up to 16 as you saw. So here you can hit the center button, you can have all these settings here. This is what mine is here. You can hit import, and of course this already has to be in your SD card. So once you follow the tutorial that's linked at the end of this video, you can go ahead and add plenty more in here. All right, you made it to the end. This is my favorite camera setting, which is having separate photo and video settings. You see, when you first get your camera and you switch between photo and video mode, the exposure settings are the same. If I want 1/50th of a second in video, as soon as I switch to photo and I shoot with that setting, I'm gonna get like a blurry image of my friends, of my wife, and that's not what I want. I got a set for photo and I got a set for video, and I still get the right exposure. It's not too bright, it's not too dark, not too blurry, and not too still if that's not what I'm going for. All right, let's go down to the yellow tab, the setup tab, move over to the right, and we're gonna go down to dial operation customize, and then go down to different set for still and movie, and we're just gonna hit OK, and just make sure you check each and every one of these, because you want all these to be different settings for your photos and your videos.
hit OK.
If you have yet to shoot in manual mode for photos, then check this out video over here.